Hello, my name is Miles, and I am your host of Stop Stigma, Start Healing, the raw and uncensored podcast where we talk openly and unapologetically about our lives as trans, lesbian, bi, gay, queer, and HIV positive humans. Our goal is to stop the stigma that prevents us from getting the health care we deserve. Each episode will feature real people in our community in conversation and storytelling. And here's my disclaimer. The experiences shared here are valuable and important. They are based on the lives of those in this space and some of you who are listening. Prepare to be educated, shocked, seen, triggered, and informed. No matter your response, keep the conversation going. Start healing. So I am here with three great guests that I'm going to, in a second, have go around and do a brief little introduction on an episode that we are calling
TransCare Discussion.
TransCare Discussion. Thank you for that. We've been chatting about what we were going to call this episode for the last 10 minutes. So TransCare Discussion. If you wouldn't mind going around the room, say your first name, your pronouns, and just basic information on what you want the audience to know about who you are today in this space. Just the short bio.
Okay.
You want to go first?
Yeah. So I'm AJ. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a therapist at Blue Boat Counseling. So that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that. Let's see. I don't know. I guess yeah, I really enjoy my work. And I think there's a lot that we'll be discussing today that I'm really excited to get to.
Very good.
My name is Melanie, she, her, hers. I work in community mental health as a scheduler, and I love that. I transitioned over 20 years ago. I'm a binary trans woman.
Great, and more to come?
Maybe.
Okay, we'll see.
Hi, my name is Genesis Vaughn. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I work within HIV prevention as a community health worker, and I identify as a Black, non-binary trans woman, and just happy to be here.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. In preparation, I just was digging up some basics, statistics about the trans and non-binary community. It's as you probably know, it's a struggle actually getting good data. I think there's a lot of reasons why it's problematic and risky for people to report out to government agencies, for instance. I think that there are some opportunities coming through the National Center for Transgender Equality that I think will give us some better information. Until then, I've got some data from UCLA, which I think was their data comes also from a census survey that was done a few years ago, that there are 1.6 million trans folks in the USA ages 13 and up, and 1.2 million people who identify as non-binary, age 13 and up. I think those numbers are really low for all of those reasons, but we are eagerly waiting those results from the national study. Some upsetting information, which is not news to the people in this room, but some data that I got from HRC. As of March 2023, 7 states have banned gender affirming care. This was, as of March 2023. 4 states have passed legislation waiting for governor approval. There's 6 additional states that have legislation in process. Just in 2023 alone, there's been 180 discrimination bills in America that have been introduced. That should shock everyone listening. Everyone should be upset. Everyone should get engaged. This is a direct attack on our trans and non-binary community. We know for a fact that gender affirming care saves lives. And so we are here to just raise the voices of these 3 folks, but also for some of those who are at home that are listening that maybe aren't able to speak up or don't have the platform to speak up. We're hoping that our voices can shed some light on real people living their lives and trying to survive in the country that is making it really challenging right now. So if we could go back around the room, and it can be really in any order, if you can spend maybe 5 to 7 minutes talking a little bit more about your coming out experience and whatever that means for you. And I won't even look, so you can decide who goes first.
I came out in 2002. I was in between like 6th grade and 7th grade. And, well, you know, like I feel like as trans people, we sometimes come out more than once. You know what I mean? Like there are different ways that you come out of the closet. Like I probably came out first time to my mom at 4 years old, and then took my parents as, you know, boomers in the 90s, you know, with no resources. It took them a while to get any sort of resources that weren't either conversion therapy or religion. And so yeah, I like switched schools, grew my hair out, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops to start my transition. I don't have anything else to share about that.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, for myself, I know I kind of, before actually coming to any sort of realization as far as like being a trans person, like I came out, you know, identifying as, you know, gay, basically as a gay guy, pretty much. But I really had to think a lot about like identity wise, because I would say maybe like around my final year of college, like, you know, I had already gone through kind of like this idea of like understanding, well, okay, like I can be my own sort of man. I don't have to, you know, fall into these kind of like typical tropes or, you know, roles. But the idea of being any sort of man just really didn't sit with me at all. And so at that point, I kind of started like walking out of that. And like I first identified as like a demi guy, which is like part guy, but then like part something, you know, different than that. And then it progressed to just general non-binary. And then I think kind of like the latest catalyst, which happened for me a little over 3 years ago, maybe like 3.5 or so, was I really just had to like think about like how I always basically saw myself. And I always picture myself as a woman or, you know, a feminine person generally. And that was particularly important because at that point, I realized that I wanted to start hormone replacement therapy, which granted, of course, you know, hormones are not, you know, that doesn't make someone trans or non-trans. But it was more so just kind of that big block in terms of, you know, being able to be the person that I am today. And as far as kind of like coming out with that, a lot of it kind of started when I started grad school and I had, you know, plenty of friends and things like that. Coming out to my parents, I did much later. That was actually during the pandemic, during the first year. And yeah, all of my friends and coworkers know, so that's where I am now.
Thank you. Thanks.
I guess that leaves me.
Yeah.
I just remember as a kid, like growing up, not having language for a lot of things I was going through. I remember having like my chest crawling before top surgery happened later in my life, which I later kind of got descriptions of as being more like gender dysphoria as well as like some sensory stuff. But like, I remember that. And then I didn't have language for it. So I couldn't talk to my parents about it. I couldn't talk to any of my friends about it. No one understood. So And I played for girls' soccer teams for a very long time, and that was not a safe space to talk about much of anything. I knew, well, I didn't know. I came out as a lesbian to myself and no one else until end of high school, because it just wasn't safe. I was homeschooled. A lot of people in the community were very conservative. I grew up in a military family, very much like don't ask, don't tell kind of period, at least for my dad. So there was that. It really wasn't safe to come out. And then I went through college and I played for a women's sports team there. Also didn't come out. They said I was out as a lesbian, but I don't remember ever coming out to anybody, actually. So, and that wasn't even the correct identity, because lesbian didn't fit. My sexuality didn't fit my gender identity either. So it was like the last year of college, and my soccer coach was doing a research project on perception of women's bodies in sports. And she started asking me these questions. She took me on for the research. And I remember at the end, she asked me if there was anything else I needed to add. And I said, I don't think I identify as a female. And she said that's why she picked me. And I just remember being like, wow, okay. That was the first person that ever recognized that, like, I was not a woman on the binary. And then I got to grad school, did a lot of reading, started doing research on the trans community, kind of figured out that was the word that described me best. And I just remember when I came across that word in my research, like, because there wasn't language for me, I bawled because I was like, oh my God, like, this fits. And my family is going to hate this. So it just, and like I still get the name to this day and misgendered by people in my family and, corrected, yelled at, a lot of things. So it's interesting.
So, thank you for sharing that. I heard some words come up, and I thought it might be helpful for the folks listening at home to understand what that language means. So I hear trans, I hear non-binary, I also hear sometimes gender non-conforming. Could one or all of you help with that language and what that means for folks listening?
Yeah, so in my mind, if we're looking at the binary, that's more so like we have the binary and we have non-binary. So non-binary is kind of like just not on the binary of male and female, is kind of a more open description of that, I would think.
Okay.
I would agree with that. But I think, much like sexuality, like gender exists on a Kinsey scale, like there are people that feel very defined in their gender. Like I do not identify with anything masculine. Like I'm absolutely binary, but I know plenty of people who are not and do not feel that way at all.
And I know, at least for myself, a lot of people, when I tell them like, oh, I'm a non-binary trans woman, a lot of people think, well, isn't that kind of like contradicting yourself? And I say, well, I kind of identify with this sense of, like the messiness or like the chaos of, gender in and of itself. But I find comfort in womanhood or, comfort with femininity. That's the way that I prefer to, be seen. And so I think that kind of just is one of, countless examples of how kind of non-binary can function, in conjunction with a binary identity. So,
And then how about gender non-conforming? Where does that?
I think that is, I'm not sure, but I feel like that could be another word for non-binary. But there are people that are non-binary that don't feel like they identify with any gender, or they feel like they identify with both, or, it changes. So I just don't think that there are really rules.
Okay. I'm actually okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what was your initial involvement like in the LGBTQ community, and then how has it changed over time?
The first interaction I ever had with the LGBTQ community was Kaleidoscope. I was like 12 years old. I grew up in Worthington, which was gross. And my mom was desperate for me to be around other queer kids. And, you know, I grew up near like Columbus adjacent. So Kaleidoscope was a huge resource for that. Went to my first Pride parade with Kaleidoscope. You know, countless other first-time LGBTQ adjacent experiences there. I'm sure a lot of people who have gone to Kaleidoscope have had the same experiences. Because when you're queer or trans in, you know, these conservative suburbs, even though you're near big cities, it can feel like you're really far away from anything that is othered. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. Grew up in rural Ohio, so
Yeah,
yes.
so you get it.
That's, yeah. And yeah.
Well, I think for myself, like, I really didn't have any involvement until I started undergrad or started college, basically, because I like grew up in Cleveland, you know, kind of like a big like metropolitan area, but you know, living with my parents, like I really didn't have access to like...
You were kind of under their thumb.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I really didn't have like any way of engaging or, you know, even being in community with other, you know, LGBTQ folks. And so a lot of that in college was, you know, going to... If I remember correctly, it was called Vision, which was kind of like our umbrella LGBTQ organization on campus. You know, just general friendships there. And then going on into like grad school, like a lot of that was kind of tied in with some community organizing work that I was doing at the time, both on campus as well as just within Cincinnati. And I think those are just kind of like my initial steps of actually being able to know people and, you know, be in any sort of community alongside folks. So, yeah.
How about you, AJ?
I think for me, the first thing was coming out and then educating myself within grad school and kind of educating other people along with me, starting my kind of journey there, I guess. And from there, I went into what I'm going to call queer healthcare, and worked in that with queer-owned businesses for 4 years, and just worked with the population, worked with my community, worked with a lot of folks. Very proud of that work, and I think it was very important. There's a lot of people that I don't forget, and I think they really stick with me. Some of the experiences I've heard and those kinds of things. So just knowing that, you know, I've been someone that has been there to hear these stories and witness these stories has been a big deal. And now at the agency I'm with, you know, we're working on just getting policies really together and being really strong at being LGBTQ affirming and getting that together. And I'm very proud of them for the work that they're doing.
Nice. So you all did a fairly good job of you did a great job on how you got in your early interactions with the community. How is it now? The heat's turned up a little bit, right? And there's the legislation stuff that's happening, and you know, we're sort of lumped together this LGBTQ thing. I always think is a interesting marriage of people who couldn't have more separated experiences. But where are you? How does it all fit in your lives today?
It is our lives.
It is your
lives. I don't think the LGBT community, once you come out and I don't think it's something you visit. It's something you're in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, how's it evolved? I got older. Here we are.
I thought you got younger.
Well, trying.
Yeah.
Well, I think for myself in particular, because I kind of more or less recently moved to Columbus. I would say I've been here for about a year and a half. And so I think kind of like finding a community here is something that's still very much like in the works, at least for myself.
That's valid.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, like I have like, coworkers and things like that, that I would say I'm in community with. But, I think a lot of it was particularly because like when I moved to Columbus, like I just kind of like took a break from any sort of like activism or, things like that. And I think, since then, like it's still, I'm kind of slowly, like thinking about getting back into that. Maybe that would result in like having some more, sense of like community in terms of like people like I can directly identify. But I think I also, definitely align with Melanie's idea as far as like, when you're in the community, like you're there, whether it be just virtual or, within your city, if you know people across the state, across the country, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the big thing that's changed for me over time has been where my community has been. So, I worked for a larger organization that had community all around me. And so the activism felt very different there than it does now. Because you had support everywhere, right? And that was more so I got lucky where I worked. I don't think that's the case for most people to have that experience. And I would consider myself really lucky to have had that experience. And I think I have more language, I think, is the only difference for me, to be able to speak about what's going on in our community. And that's been a big difference in just knowing how to navigate my language and try to help people understand it.
Okay, thank you. So I've mentioned the anti-trans legislation. It's ramping up. It doesn't seem to be diminishing at all. And I'm curious, and there again, I know this is sort of a deeply personal question, but how is the stress of that impacting you and, your chosen family? How is it just that? I mean, I know from my own practice, the folks that I'm seeing and how it has shaped their healthcare discussions with me, but I'm wondering if you could share anything that might be validating for someone at home to hear.
I'll start us off. I don't know. I guess with these hospitals coming through and the way it's been affecting my own health and healthcare, I'm someone who's in recovery from an eating disorder and pretty far into recovery, and this year I've probably had more slips than I've had since I came out of treatment. Largely because of some of the trans legislation and my nervousness about losing HRT access, losing a lot of things, having my clients maybe be harmed in the process, right? There are days that like stress is just so intense that like your stomach is churning and you feel sick. And there are some days when you just feel anxious going to work because you're sitting there in front of someone who is impacted by these things. And at some point in time, there's probably going to be some harm done. So a lot of eating disorder slips, a lot of mental health kind of things, a lot of stress. And my spouse has also been very, very stressed out by this stuff. Also having a lot of stress responses and sleepless nights and just a lot of stress, I guess.
I mean, it's kind of everywhere. You can't really escape it. I do think that it is giving me some major anxiety and some major fear. But it's kind of like, it's good to pay attention to those things. It's good to know what's happening, but like you cannot consume too much of it, or like you're not like if I paid attention to that every single day, and I try not to because I know it's there, I know it's happening, I would not be able to function. I wouldn't be able to get any of my work done. I wouldn't be able to enjoy being awake. I would just be existing in fear. And that's what those people want. They want us to be existing in this terrified state of shame. You know, I've Pride's like this weekend, and I've heard countless people say, well, should I go? Yeah, you should go. They don't want you to go. That's why they're doing it, because they want you to be afraid.
It's been rough, to say the least.
Very.
Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, like I probably need to take some sort of break from even just like social media, because like I can't go on like Twitter for like 10 minutes without seeing some sort of like reactionary anti-LGBTQ, particularly like anti-trans kind of like rhetoric. And, there have been moments where like I've almost like fallen into kind of like that spiral of just like feeling like I have to like just consume or just, and I had to like realize like, okay, like I know who I am and like who trans people are. I know that those people are wrong, but still to just like expose oneself to that, it can be a lot. And I mean, whether it be like anxiety or like depression, like it will like manifest itself if you don't try to even just like step back from it, and then maybe start to like think about like, okay, like what does, self-care or like resiliency look like for me? But yeah, I think particularly myself, like I'm just, thinking about like, okay, what can I do to support other trans people? And yeah, so I would say a lot of that.
Well, you, Miles, how's it affected you?
Good question. Boy, I didn't really prepare an answer for that. I mean, it has changed, like I had mentioned, the conversations that I'm having with people that I'm seeing in care, and I think the people who are seeking care. So from that perspective, learning how to be a different kind of a support person, because it's like it's a very real threat, right? So it isn't like pulling out your old CBT tricks is something that doesn't really work, because it's actual real threat.
They're on a pathway to take away gender affirming care to the smallest level of gender affirming care from, they're doing minors now, but they're going to move on to adults, and that's going to cause mass death.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've worked with, I support organizations financially. I get involved. I make sure that I am talking to folks that I'm in spaces with to make sure that they understand why it's important that they're voting, they're paying attention to who they're voting for and what it means. Because as most of us, we probably interact with more non-LGBTQ people than we do LGBT, just looking at our own families of origin. It's like that group of people. And I mean, that's frustrating because at least for me, there's not a ton of support in those spaces, but I do make sure that they know where I stand, and that I make sure that I get information and education out to them. And I do what I can to stay on top. It feels like all the time there's new things that are coming out and new ways that they're planning attacks.
Well, the interesting thing about hormone replacement therapy is, like trans people have been getting hormone replacement therapy without the supervision of a doctor for a very long time. So like, if you want to take that away, like,
there's other ways.
Like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, trans people have existed long before these haters have been a
very
political
long.
movement. Yes. Since the beginning of time. Yes. So with that, let's take a brief little break for a little commercial that will be inserted here a little later. And when we come back, we'll finish up our time together.
We've existed and thrived in every civilization and society since the beginning of time. Every attempt to erase us has failed. Connection is key to our health and well-being. So let's talk. Trans support groups, including In Transition and Melanated Connections, can be found at equitashealth.com.
Welcome back to TransCare Discussion. I'm here with Genesis, Melanie, and AJ, and we're having a grand old time talking about super heavy stuff. And we're finishing our time together here after a few more questions. But I'm just curious, what are you all watching on the platforms? Like, what shows do you enjoy watching? What do you watch on MySpace or wherever the folks get viral videos?
What are the kids watching
what are
on
the
the
kids
platforms?
watching these days?
I mean,
You're watching Ally McBeal? Is that what you said?
Nobody's watching Ally McBeal.
Oh, okay.
I did watch Ally McBeal when it was on TV. I'm watching The Last of Us.
Oh.
I'm really excited for the Sex and the City reboot, second season coming out. But yeah, nothing super exciting. I feel like most of the good TV shows come out in the winter and the fall. It's like the new seasons.
Friends? Is that still around?
I mean, it's something you're still available to watch. It exists.
Well, TV in general, I have a lot to catch up on.
You're a book reader, Genesis, aren't you?
I wish I was.
Okay.
It's very intermittent, but I would say I've been watching a lot of movies, particularly. That's something that my partner and I do together. Like this past weekend, we actually saw The Watermelon Woman. And we also saw, if I remember it correctly, Workmeyer Harmonies. Very long movie. Very easy to fall asleep to, I would say, in a dark theater. But I would say that also watch a lot of YouTube, a lot of cooking videos. Love Emmy Made. If there's any time where I just need some sort of positivity, she's always got something going on. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't watch TV.
I knew one of you was going to be that person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ever? What do you read? The New York Times? What are you doing?
I go outside a lot.
I watch nature.
Yeah.
You watch nature?
We hike around. Yeah.
Okay.
No TV.
No TV ever?
Not for the last couple of years. It's been...
I
can't sit still that long, and I can't pay attention that long. Thank God client sessions are only an hour.
Okay.
So,
and podcasts.
I binge a lot of TV. I'll find a show that I like, and then I'll watch it every night until I go through it.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah, but I specifically look for shows that have 8 seasons, so that I can really waste my evenings.
Dig in.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's good to know about you too. I like to hike too. I'm going to drag you out hiking sometime.
Okay.
So back to the heavy questions. Here we go. So, how have healthcare providers and or your family and or your community responded to you about the stuff happening in the world, or have they? What is that for you?
I'll go first, if that's okay. Yeah, I think for me, bringing this up to my family, my nuclear family, has been a very divided response. Some people in my family have very much been like, it's the 1%, why care, kind of stuff. Kind of pitching us to be kind of pedophilic and a lot of other things that are very difficult to kind of deal with and very offensive. I've had members of my family that have been incredibly supportive, have listened, have said things to other people even. I have a provider that was not my provider that kind of was like, hey, like, we can go this way and get your hormones. Like, we'll figure it out and make sure you have access and that kind of shit. And so I've switched providers there. And just like, yeah, I haven't heard too much from many of my providers, but what they are saying has very much been affirming. But I also have mostly queer providers, so there's that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, providers I have really, like my providers are really informed and like it hasn't really come up. But my family is kind of driving me nuts a little bit. And I say that like with love because I have great parents.
They're listening.
Yeah, I have great parents, but I think when you have a trans child and you're like feeling positive about that and you're aware of everything that's going on, you tend to worry more. And so I'm going to Pride, I'm like going out and my parents are like worried about every little thing that I'm doing. And it's like, I'm 34 years old. Like, also they're telling me stuff like I don't already know. But it's also like they're telling me stuff I don't want to know. And so, I think in some cases, like their own fear is making them really pay attention to everything. And then they come to me with this urgency and terror. And I have to kind of wade through that a little bit and calm them down and be like, so I already knew all of this. Everybody actually already knows all of that. You need to take a breath.
Well, as far as providers, it really hasn't come up, I actually just had like a therapy appointment earlier this week, where, we were kind of talking about like how my mood has been. And I, mentioned like obviously everything going on with like a lot of like anti-trans legislation, like that really has been kind of like weighing heavy. And fortunately, like they were definitely, receptive to that. But yeah, it really hasn't come up. I think it's, just again, like providers like are already aware. As far as family, really in terms of like the family I talk with, it's just like my mom, my brother, and my nephew. My dad passed a few years back, but I've really been amazed. Yeah, I would say amazed particularly by my mom and just some of like her general awareness of like what's going on, because I went back home last week just for a night, and she and I were talking over dinner, and she was just saying like, oh, like Ron DeSantis, like that man is like terrible, and which, I mean, of course, very much agree. But it was just nice to, have this moment where like I realized like, okay, like she's actually, kind of like tuned in to like all of like what's happening, maybe she doesn't have like the exact way or language to kind of talk about it like very deep and in depth, but at least being able to acknowledge that like a lot of like what's going on is just wrong and just abhorrent basically. So I would say talking with her has been really enjoyable, I would say.
Good to hear. So last question, where do you find hope? Where do you find hope? Let's make it a two-parter. Like what's the future like for you, and where do you find hope?
Hope is a hard one.
Yeah.
Yeah, hope is a very hard one. It's a hard word to put here, I think. God, I think one of the things that's given me hope in my community and my family, at least parts of my family, have been the effort they've been putting forth that I've seen. It's like the effort I see at the clinic I work at, and the effort I see from people outside of the community even jumping in and like trying to understand and trying to join the movement. And my other hope is Illinois. I'm going to move out of state if I have to, right? To keep my HRT access. But yeah, I don't know. For Ohio, it's really hard to find that right now. And I think some of the people I see are having a hard time finding it too.
Yeah. Illinois seems to be a place.
According to a couple people I've talked to, so that may or may not be true, but it sounds like there are some things that they've put in place that have been a little more protective than in other states.
Okay. Good to know.
I think hope is a big ask right now. There's a lot of things that are genuinely terrifying, and there's so much unknown, like like you just mentioned, like the prospect of having to move. Like a lot of us don't have the luxury of leaving the situations that we're in. They're not replicatable. Like I have a job that I love that I would not find anywhere else. I have friends that I would not find anywhere else. And so, yeah, I could move if I needed to, but it would uproot me from everything that I know. Mm-hmm. And I think that feels really hopeless and terrifying. Sorry, that was dark.
Well, no, because I think what I heard from you is that you find hope sort of where you are with the people around you that care about you. And
yeah, definitely I do. But I also, like, throughout all of this, as I watch these legislations passes, they seem to be coming up north farther and farther and farther. And, like as an adult who's been on HRT for 16 years, if I couldn't, if there was a nationwide ban, I can't say that I would survive that.
Yeah. I, thinking about hope, I think obviously right now, here we are, it's Pride Month, this is supposed to be, kind of a great time, but it's just not a lot of times. But, I think about kind of that juxtaposition. And then I was also at an event last week, and there was a speaker who was a trans masculine person. And, he was talking about how he came out back in 2009 and was doing a lot of advocacy work and kind of the early 2010s. And he said, compared to now, this has been the worst that it's been. It hasn't been this bad. And so I think, in terms of finding hope, a lot of it is, I think, just a sheer kind of resistance towards it, I know for myself, hope, it's something that I'm still kind of digging and, looking for kind of this pure sense. But, I find hope in, trans elders who have, been through this, maybe not in this specific form as far as this legislation and a lot of, this rise in general of anti-trans rhetoric. But I think, finding hope in that, finding hope in just seeing how myself, how I've grown in terms of like my transness and other people who have transitioned alongside me. So I would say, that's kind of just the very beginning of it, at least, kind of that tip of the iceberg of maybe something bigger and better for all of us.
Yeah, I think we've our community's come out so far. I think even with the opportunities they're using with legislation that I do think is an act of terrorism, I think they're going to have a really hard time keeping us in there. And I think if we can stay together and connect with our allies, for me, that's our path out. I mean, if you look through history, our communities have been under attack multiple times with other governments, other times in our nation's history and other nation states and other civilizations. And we eventually find the workaround. And I think our community has even more, I think there's more things in place now. We're more global than ever before, that I think that trying to silence us is going to be a bigger challenge than their bills on paper can manage. So I'm trying to find some hope in that. Because otherwise I can't sleep. I can't, it's a struggle to go to work. It's a struggle to provide any care for people. Melanie, you had mentioned earlier about folks saying they don't want to go to Pride, and it's like, I don't want to go. And I need to go more than ever, because I realize that I have a particular privilege and I need to be out there. I encourage anyone else who can or is in that situation to come out. Can I say that there's not an opportunity for danger? No, but staying inside, I don't think we're any more immune to the danger that's out there. So it's lurking. And so that's all I've got.
And I think, maybe if I could just plug in something else, I think, particularly for myself, I think there's a lot of power in just being the person that you needed to see when you were younger, and I think that's something, like I think about someone like Little Nas X, he's cis, but like I, just think about like his music and like his artwork and kind of just like his general persona. And I think back to myself, like coming up and, in middle school and high school, and full transparency, like I had like a lot of like internalized homophobia and a lot of internalized racism, because the idea of being Black and queer just did not like add up for me. And, I think about like someone like him, and I'm just amazed at like, what if I had that, when I was coming up. And, I'm happy that, young Black and brown and, queer and trans youth of color have that now. And, I think about like myself, the idea of like going out to Pride, like, or even just like walking down the street, like some people might see me as like, openly trans or queer or things like that, but I think about maybe like there's just some like kid at like the bus stop who, maybe is like laughing with their friends, but like in the back of their mind, they're like, that's a possibility for me, and so I think just the very idea of like existing and being visible in whatever way works best for you. I mean, we can go on critiquing visibility, but But I think just kind of being that person that maybe you needed is really particularly important.
Yeah, I'm one who strongly believes that visibility is a revolutionary act, and so it's great that you brought up Lil Nas, because I think that's an example of, like, right, he's a pop star, right? He was no pop star I ever had growing up. Like, my favorite pop stars were in the closet white gay men. You know, George Michael, loved him, but it took him till he was 40 something to even, like, verbalize that he was a gay man. And I think young people have someone like Lil Nas who's, like, pushing boundaries. Lots of performers are doing it. I think but I think us stepping out in the streets, I think we are all versions of Lil Nas to somebody in the world, right? Like, someone is seeing us and hopefully seeing a sense of hope for themselves. Like, oh, I could be a therapist, or, you know, it's like, I can do these things. So, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other final words? I had someone that told me, I'm not the first, like, in relation to these events. And it just kind of reminds me of what Genesis was saying. We've had some other people that have gone through these things similar, maybe not exact, but we can find some guidance or some hope in some of the elders, I think, sometimes. And just to know we're not alone in what's going on. Exactly.
And you're going to be an elder. You are an elder to somebody.
Somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. We all are elders to somebody, but yeah.
Speak for yourself.
I am an elder to most people, so I get that. Well, thank you for being here, Genesis, Melanie, AJ. I really appreciate you coming out tonight and talking about this and spreading the word and getting the message out there to more people in a different way. This is visibility in a different way. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Happy Pride.